Welcome to Paper Defiance, a fortnightly podcast all about indie bookshops and their owners. My name's Alex, and I'm recording this on Wadawurrung land in Ballarat, Australia. It's exciting to have you join me. In this episode, I'm doing something a bit different in that I'm talking to Sue Beal about Clunes Booktown. You'll hear her explain what Booktown is. Spoiler, it's a weekend of literary panels and booksellers who take over the very cute little town of Clunes in Victoria, Australia, once a year. For my international listeners, if you've seen a period drama set in Australia, you may actually have already seen the main street of Clunes, because it regularly gets used as a movie set by pouring dirt on the bitumen and other such dressings. I did a quick check of Wikipedia to remind myself of which films and discovered that it's everything from one of the original Mad Max films to Heath Ledger's Ned Kelly, plus a bunch of others and some TV as well. All of which is not actually related to Booktown, but does give you a sense of the town's arty connections. So here's Sue to tell you more about that.
My name is Sue Beal. I am the CEO of Creative Clunes, and we run the Clunes Booktown Festival.
For people who haven't heard of Clunes Booktown, do you have a nice pithy little description about what it actually is?
Oh, okay. It's been around since 2009, so I hope people would have heard about it. Every year we have 2 days in Clunes, and Clunes is a seriously beautiful little town in the goldfields in Victoria. And we close down 2 of the main roads and fill them full of booksellers and author talks and conversations and music and children's events. So it's a really fulsome 2 days, but basically with the book at its heart.
And then I have to ask, explain why Clunes?
Okay, this goes back to, I think about 2005 when Clunes was one of the regional towns that was, struggling, and a group of sort of like-minded and committed citizens got together and decided that its future was in the book and in the sale bookshops. And so they had a one-day event which they put on, all of their own doing and own making. And they expected, a few hundred people would turn up, and thousands turned up, and it was a real surprise to them. And from then on in, it's just got bigger and bigger and bigger, and to the point now where it does receive government funding and sponsorship, but it is absolutely those people who were still, and are to this day, still committed and involved and active in Booktown.
Because it is a relatively small town when you go there just on a normal day. And so it has a disproportionate number of bookshops, it seems to me.
Yeah, well, it's certainly, yes, it is a very small town, and it's a small town that punches above its weight. And it has 4 very active bookshops at the moment, which must be a reasonably decent percentage of all the shops in town.
And a fantastic bakery, I discovered.
A couple of 3 fantastic cafes now. It's just really coming back into its own. It took a big knock during COVID, as a lot of, not just regional towns, international problem, but and it's really just starting to get back on its feet now. And so it's a great place to be.
And how long have you been in the role of CEO?
Oh, I've been in the role of CEO for about 1.5 years.
And what does it actually mean for you to be the CEO throughout the year? Well,
we have tried. Creative Clunes doesn't just do the Booktown. It does other events in Clunes and surrounds. We run the Ceramics Award. That's biennial. Biennial Ceramics Award. And we are also, this year, we're doing a chill out program outside of the Booktown weekend. So we try to encourage writers and artists in general to create work, to talk about work, to be interested in what's going on in the local community and surrounds all year. So, but of course, Booktown it's the biggest and the most time consuming and requires the most enormous effort from not just, we have the equivalent of one staff member. I work 2 days. The administrator, Tom Brooker, works 2 days, and the chief finance officer, with a very, very highfalutin term, works 1 day a week, John Hawkes. And so the three of us put together the annual program, but also, the Booktown Festival. But I have to say, we could not possibly manage it if it wasn't for the extraordinary commitment of the local community. We have about 100, I think this year we're looking at about 100 volunteers. We have volunteers who, not just the board, who are all volunteers, who work, constantly throughout the year, but we have volunteers that come up from Melbourne, from New South Wales, from the Blue Mountains, from Geelong. They all come in to work on the festival, and they do extraordinary jobs. Like, they will put up all the marquees and pull down the marquees. They'll lay out the cabling, you name it, they do it. And they do it for the joy of it. And I'm always staggered when I come into a Booktown about the enthusiasm of the locals, but also local businesses. Local businesses commit an enormous amount. The RACV is our accommodation partner, and without them, we just couldn't accommodate a lot of the people who are coming in to work, to be involved in panels and things. And ACU campus in Ballarat are now our major sponsor. Wesley College, which has a campus in Clunes, is a major sponsor. They all really have come behind it, so it's great.
Really quite impressive, the level of community engagement and community very broadly understood, not just from Clunes itself. Is that community aspect, is that one of the things that particularly drew you to the idea of being involved with Creative Clunes and Clunes Booktown? Well,
I was living in Melbourne, and my husband actually is, a mad reader and has, literally thousands of books that surround him all the time. He never is without a book. And a friend of ours told us that the Booktown Festival in Clunes was looking for a CEO. And we have got friends in the area, and we were always coming up here, and we thought, what a perfect job and a great place to be. So in the end, we decided that we would apply together, because my background was in management of organisations, of arts organisations in particular. So we applied for it as joint.
At this point, Sue switches from a phone to the computer. So slight break in the conversation and a slight change in the sound as well.
So now, where did I get up to? Okay, so we decided to apply for the job as joint CEO, and we were offered the job. And we applied for the job in lockdown from Melbourne, started the job in lockdown, and then as we started to come out, I think it was during two lockdowns, we came up and started working up in Clunes, and we just loved it. And so we decided to sell up in Melbourne and move to Clunes, which we did. That's how we're here.
So it has literally brought you from the city to the town to be involved with the organisation.
Exactly.
I've been involved in organising small things. I assume that you need to start organising, like your speakers and so on, a year, 18 months out. Is that about right?
Not 18 months, I wish. No, usually about a year. But when you're organising, like say when we were organising this year's festival, we've been talking to a lot of authors who weren't available, who said, put me down for 2024. So in a sense, you are working that far out, but mostly it takes about a year. But authors are really keen to be here because they're promoting their work. They're able to sell their work. We have readings and Shoreline and so many booksellers that will sell the work of the authors on who are on the panels and in the conversations. So they're keen to do that as well. And the booksellers themselves, well, why not? Because you get there are people that come to Booktown. My first Booktown was the last one. I was staggered. About 8:00, they were lining outside the gate to come in. No one was on the gate at 8:00 because they want to get in and grab the good books. And they were going out with boxes of books and bags of books over their shoulder. You know, no one needs to be, concerned. The book is not dead.
Yeah, last year was my first Clunes Booktown as well. I've just moved to Ballarat, so it's become a lot easier to attend. And I was stunned and really impressed by the secondhand range. Yes, the new books are fantastic, but the sheer number of people there who were selling just the most remarkable range of secondhand books was really quite astonishing.
Yeah, absolutely. From comic books all the way through to antiquarian, really high cost, collectibles. So yeah, and everything in between.
Do you find that you're getting people from all across Victoria who are coming to the festival itself?
Both booksellers and visitors are from all across Australia, in fact. Yes, mostly from Victoria, obviously. Lots from Melbourne. But they come in from Tasmania, New South Wales, Queensland. This is booksellers. And we have been starting to track where the visitors are coming from. And like I say, we had a whole book club come down from Sydney last year. So, that sort of thing does happen.
A book road trip. That's one of the best things I've ever heard of. What a good idea.
Yep. There were 8 of them, and they rented out a large Airbnb house and had a ball.
I think you're now describing like my ideal holiday. That sounds incredible.
Yeah.
You've only been kind of directly involved for a relatively short period of time, but do you have a sense of how things have changed over... that's a really hard question though, isn't it? Because the pandemic just puts a kibosh on kind of everything.
Well, I think that, obviously it's got larger and larger. It was just a little small event in what we lovingly refer to as the Booktown Elders' eyes. But now it started to expand its remit last year, and we have really ramped that up this year. It has always had the book at its heart. But what we have done this year, and a little bit last year as a sort of teaser, was to look more in the remit has expanded to storytelling in all of its forms. So this year you'll notice that in the program we're including visual artists, film, TV, songwriters, street art, poets. I can't think, but that huge range of all these artists that use their skill to tell their story. Well, architect, we've got Jeffer Greenway, who's an award-winning architect, talking about how he brings his story of country into his architecture. So it's really expanded it out. It's a bit of a test to see if there's an interest. But so many artists live, Melbourne, but also throughout regional Victoria, that they can come and talk to these really well-known artists about how they go about doing their work and telling their story. So that's just another layer that's been added to the festival.
And is that because you see kind of the idea of the book in a really broad way, as you say, storytelling kind of broadly understood?
Yes, exactly. That there are many ways to tell the story, but also, lots of authors, writers are really interested in, say, writing for film and television, songwriting, broadening out their view. So it gives them a chance to go and listen to the people, talk to the people about how they got into that, how they do it.
When you're planning those sorts of panels that you've got on, I know I have had a look at your program and it's broad and exceptional. Are you trying to aim at both creatives and sort of the general public? Are you trying to cater for both
Absolutely, and I think that has been what Booktown has always achieved. If you look at the attendance to most of the panels and the conversations, you'll find that there is always a good representation of locals, of artists who are interested in learning about, maybe they're starting out writing, or that, they want to continue their writing and maybe move into a different area. And then the actual authors and writers themselves. I think we've got about 100 artists, writers, authors coming up this year, and they're all booking themselves into other of the talks and panels. So, yeah, they're a really broad interest.
And I think that sort of answers my next question, but I'll ask it anyway. Do you find that there tends to be a camaraderie amongst the people who are there as panelists and as, people who are involved in all of the variety of activities?
Yes. And look, it's really interesting because it starts even with our volunteers. Jan and Pearl have been doing the front gate at Booktown for, I think, since inception. They met that way, they've become fast friends, and all of our volunteers say just that. When they get involved in Booktown, they get to know people and they get to make friends. With all of the authors and writers that come and are involved in panels and talks, they always, so many of them say, "Oh, I must come back," and they have become friends with other writers and authors in the process. You'll ring somebody and ask them if they would like to be a chairperson, and they say, "Oh, what panel is it?" And you tell them who's on the panel. Go, "Oh God, yes, I've always wanted to talk to them. Oh, and let's all go out to lunch afterwards." So yeah, it does. It has a great sense of camaraderie.
In the last 18 months that you've been doing it, have there been surprises for you?
Well, certainly the commitment of the local community and our volunteers, like I say, it would never happen if it wasn't for the volunteers. And that really surprised me. I come from a background of working in the arts, running theatres and venues, and you would never, well, you probably wouldn't be able to use volunteers to do the sort of work we do, but you would never, ever expect that kind of commitment and from volunteers, from people that weren't being paid. That was a very pleasant surprise. The dog issue was a big one. That was the big one last year. Quite apart from COVID and having to deal with, safe, everything else, everything had to be safe practices for COVID, but we had advertised no dogs allowed. I'm not sure why, but that was how it panned out. But of course, lots of people turned up with their dogs, and people came in from Melbourne with their dogs, one person from interstate with their dogs, and you're not going to leave them in a hot car. So there was a lot of angst, and there were people with dogs that were required, and there was a lot of sort of unfortunate scenes at the box offices. So in the end, me and the chairperson said, no. We have a duty of care to our volunteers as well, and they are being, abused by some people. Not all of the dog owners, might I say, I must add, were unpleasant, but some were. So, and then we had to cope with the people within our organisation who were going, "Oh, but you can't, you're somebody will get bitten," and so it was. Yeah, I know it sounds petty, but it was the biggest thing we had to deal with. This year, it's dog friendly, but we're making sure we advertise very widely that they have to come. They've got to be tethered. If they have any bad behaviour, they're out, and you've just got to accept that they have to go. We will have the council dog, I can't remember what it is, I think dog officer, on call. And all of our volunteers will have my number and the production manager's number, so that if anything happens with dogs, we can be there on the spot. So, you experience these things and you plan to make it work the next time. So, yeah, that was the worst. And if that's, we were a bit worried. We were a bit concerned about rain for the first night, because we had noticed in the long range forecast massive rain storms coming. And so we proposed, the board met, and it can be quite dangerous if it's wet because we're putting up marquees, we're putting in power, and we're on ladders, things like that. So for our staff and our volunteers, that can be quite dangerous. So we had a meeting and decided, the board and the staff decided that for the safety of staff and volunteers, we would move it to the showgrounds. Well. There was mutiny. There was mutiny in Clunes, absolute mutiny in Clunes, because for all of the shopkeepers on, the traders on Fraser Street, it can be as good as 2 and 3 months' income in 2 days. And quite apart from the economics of it, people loved having it in Fraser Street. They loved it, and the shops are all there. And how are we going to organise food for everyone, so on and so forth. So in the end, the community, we met with members of the community and members of the traders, and it was decided that we would approach council and ask them to let us set up in advance. So normally we closed on a Friday. And we asked them if they could close all the streets on the Thursday to give us time to get it set up. And if it starts to rain, we go inside, then we come back out when it's not raining. And the council were fantastic and said, yes, absolutely, go for it. The community's behind it. So this year, same thing. We'll be closing Thursday and not opening until Monday afternoon. And that's just to give us that time, just in case of weather. Although we've moved, that's the other change. We've moved from May, which was always very cold, wet, and it would get, you would have experienced it about 5:30. It gets dark and it's cold, and people just leave in their droves. So we had very long feedback sessions with different groups, with our volunteers, with the booksellers, with the local traders, with our logistics people. Every single one of them said, change the date. So that's what we did. We brought it into daylight saving and into the warmer weather. So it's March 25 and 26 this year.
Yeah, so that's a pretty big change in terms of what the experience itself will be like, and also gave you 2 months less to do the organising.
Yes. We do this to ourselves, make things hard on ourselves. But I think that everybody was so excited that it was actually going to be in good weather, and that meant that we could look at having a nighttime program, which we have this year. So we've got a music program in what we lovingly refer to as the Tin Shed on Fraser Street. So that will be something very new.
So changing the date, expanding the idea of what Booktown panels and so on look like. Do you have thoughts or dreams, ambitions for what might the next couple of years of Booktown look like?
Well, every year, as you can imagine, when you're a subsidised organisation, it's just the hope that you make it to the next year. But of course, we would love to be able to really take yet another step, I think, where we had sort of entertained the idea, but we just didn't have the funds nor the wherewithal to do like a performance program of works that related to literature in some way. So theatre pieces, film pieces, etc., that related to literature, and have that running as a completely separate stream, probably during the evening. And that's something we will definitely be looking at again next year, assuming that we can find a sponsor or we can find some extra funding.
So I have one last question for you, which is, what are you reading at the moment?
At the moment, I am reading... Oh, that's terrible. Now you've really put me on the spot. I've completely forgotten. Gert.
Are you enjoying it?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am. I've got to get back into reading. The trouble that for me, I was one of those sad people who, during COVID, I started streaming television, and it took a long time to get back into reading. But now with this job, I have all of the opportunity in the world.
let me tell you about my favourite bookshop, my current favourite bookshop anyway. I think one of the privileges of having always lived in inner city Melbourne is that I've always lived within walking distance of a bookshop, whether that's a second-hand bookshop or a bookshop that sold new books. So my current favourite is the one that is closest to me. So that's North Melbourne Books, which is on Queensberry Street in North Melbourne, number 546. And it's a beautiful little store, very elegantly put together and curated. There's always this gorgeous window display full of the latest in newly published fiction and non-fiction, and also a lovely kids section. Its owners are a couple who live, I think, behind or up above the bookshop, and their names are Chris and Chris. I always think of them as Chris 1 and Chris 2. Unfortunately, they both wear glasses, so you can't really tell them apart until you've met them. It's hard to describe them. And it's been really fun. I think part of the joy of discovering a bookshop is also discovering and chatting to its owners. And so I've had great chats with both Chris's. One of the Chris's specialises in children's books. And so every time I need to get a present for someone's child, I always have a good chat with him about what's the latest and the popular teenage fiction or in young adults. And he's got such great range and knowledge of what's coming out in picture books as well. The other Chris has really interesting and eclectic taste in novels, and so we always have a good chat about what he's reading in fiction. And he also curates the novels that he has in the bookshop. So quite apart from the popular and also the newly published novels, he has a penchant for women writers of the early 20th century. So people like Willa Cather or Barbara Pym or Muriel Spark, and I've discovered lots of these female writers by just having a chat with him and then picking up a book that he recommended. So recently I went in and bought a book called Black Narcissus, which is by a woman called Ruma Godden, and she was born in 1907 and lived in India for the early part of her life. And so this was about a bunch of nuns who live in a convent in India, and it's a really lyrical and beautiful book, and so that was a fun recommendation from Chris 1. The other fun thing about having a local bookshop is that they deliver to your home, which is just such a treat. So during the COVID lockdown, Chris delivered books wrapped up in brown paper bags to me. I'd email him and say, can you please put aside this, or do you have this, or can you order this? And he'd say, sure. And I send across money via my credit card, and then a day or two later, or a week later, a book would drop into my letterbox. And that was just such a joy and a delightful experience to have. So, yeah, North Melbourne Books, I recommend it. If you're ever in the city, pop around. There's heaps of cafes nearby, so buy a book and then go into a coffee shop nearby and read it.
Thanks for listening to this 12th episode. If you're listening to this podcast before March 25th, you've still got time to get tickets and get to the Booktown Festival. Personally, I am super excited to see Sheila Fitzpatrick live. So if you enjoyed this episode, consider leaving a rating or a review, or just tell someone else about it. You can find Paper Defiance on Twitter as Paper Defiance Pod, on Instagram as Paper Defiance, on Facebook it's Paper Defiance Podcast, and we're also on YouTube. This podcast is created and produced by me, Alexandra Pierce. The music is called Loopster, and you can find the attribution on the website.